The next day, Luka and Ailey stood side by side at the shooting training area. Ailey had already begun firing at his target, his posture relaxed yet precise. Meanwhile, Luka stood still, gripping his pistol firmly with both hands. He took aim. A newly implanted mechanical eye now occupied his right socket, its internal screen displaying trajectory calculations in real time. His expression remained serious as he pulled the trigger. A single shot rang out. The bullet pierced directly through the center of the target's head. Smoke billowed from the impact site, swirling in the air, before dissipating. When the smoke cleared, the target was riddled with several clean holes, all clustered in the exact same spot. Not a single bullet had missed. Ailey stepped closer, eyeing Luka's target with interest, before speaking with amusement. You managed to land every shot perfectly to the head. I guess the top student really is built differently. Luka remained silent, his expression unchanged, his focus unwavering. Ailey glanced at him with a teasing smile. So, are you already getting used to that new eye of yours? He tilted his head. Isn't it unfair that someone who specializes in close combat is this good with a gun? Luka closed his eyes momentarily, his face unreadable. It's only natural that members of the Imperial Guard are proficient with all types of weapons. Then, he turned toward Ailey's target, his brows furrowing slightly. Also, I don't want to hear that from someone who just shot every bullet through the same hole. Hearing the indirect praise, Ailey chuckled, scratching the back of his head, clearly flattered. Haha, well, I just happen to specialize in firearms. Luka turned to him, his voice edged with determination. If you keep being so relaxed, I'll surpass you soon enough. Ailey smirked, his golden eyes gleaming with amusement. I'd welcome it if that happens, he leaned in slightly. Just like I said before, I'm always rooting for you. The Empire needs people like you. Luka's gaze hardened at those words, his expression turning even more serious. Ailey, however, suddenly lowered his gaze to his own hand, his fingers flexing slightly as if lost in thought. Then, in a solemn tone, he spoke. The value of true ability and talent is being diluted in the Empire. His voice was quieter now, more reflective. As long as someone has status and power, even the weak can be labeled as talented. He exhaled. But if more naturally gifted irregulars like you start to rise, don't you think people will finally be able to tell who's truly talented and who's not? Luka stiffened. His expression darkened. Ailey. His voice was low, almost a warning. That almost sounds like you're criticizing the Empire's system. His crimson eye flickered with a dangerous light as he continued. If I were to report what you just said to headquarters, even as a Karthika, you wouldn't be able to get away with it. Ailey stopped, his usual carefree demeanor momentarily fading. Then, after a brief silence, a small smile returned to his lips. Without turning around, he casually began walking away. If you were really going to do that, you wouldn't have warned me in the first place. His voice was light, yet laced with something deeper. Then, with a small chuckle, he added, I already know you're a good person. Thanks for worrying about me, Luka. Luka let out a slow breath, annoyed. He reloaded his pistol, his expression twitching slightly with irritation. So annoying. 2 years into the third training quarter, the scene shifted. Armored vehicles rumbled across the barren, dry landscape, their heavy wheels kicking up clouds of dust. Above them, the sky stretched vast and unforgiving, the horizon lined with jagged cliffs. Inside one of the vehicles, Commander Hamila's Castoria stood with his arms crossed, his expression cold and unreadable. His voice carried a weight of authority as he addressed the trainees seated before him in 2 disciplined rows. Luka and Ailey will act as platoon leaders in this training. A moment of silence followed his announcement. The trainees remained still, their gazes locked on the commander. Without hesitation, Hamila's extended one arm toward them, his other hand resting on his back. If any trainee has an issue with that, stand up and leave. Luka's expression remained serious, his crimson eye unwavering. Beside him, Ailey wore his usual confident smile, while another trainee, a white-haired soldier with red eyes, sat quietly, his gaze intense, but unreadable. When no one moved, Commander Hamila's nodded in approval. Then, I'll continue with what I was saying. He turned toward the front of the vehicle, where a gorge stretched out before them, the land dropping into a deep abyss. Beyond it, at a distance, an outpost stood, small, but fortified. Across the gorge, there is a Corite outpost illegally stationed in our territories. The armored vehicles came to a halt at the edge of the cliff. Dust settled as the hum of engines died down. Hamila's glowing red eye flickered ominously as he continued. This training is to test your ability in the field. His next words came with chilling finality. There is no need for prisoners. Kill them all. The first real mission. Two footsteps echoed on the metal floor as Luka and Ailey stepped out of the vehicle, standing in front of the assembled trainees. Ailey glanced toward the outpost in the distance, then turned to Luka, his usual smirk still present. It's our first real mission. Luka barely acknowledged him as he kept his eyes forward. What? Are you nervous? He asked, his tone edged with indifference. You've already killed people during training. Ailey exhaled, his gaze steady. But this is the first time we're facing an outside force. They stood on the cliff's edge, monitoring the outpost below. Ailey's voice grew thoughtful as he spoke. The Bellado Federation, the Holy Corite Alliance, and even the Accretian Empire, they all share the same origin. They all descend from Earth's humanity. Luka turned his gaze toward him, his red eye flickering under the dim light. There's no need to get lost in your emotions, Ailey. Then Luka's expression shifted, slightly. His focus sharpened as his gaze fell upon a towering figure standing, a fully armored knight. A red cloak draped behind it, its hem brushing the ground. The aura it emitted was suffocating, radiating overwhelming strength. Luka's eyes narrowed as he muttered, "Do you think anyone here believes the senior guards are here to protect us?" The figure's black and red mechanical armor gleamed under the fading sunlight, its presence alone a testament to power and authority. Luka's jaw tightened. "I'm sure they're here to supervise us. They might even kill us if we try taking anyone as a prisoner." His voice turned colder. "I agree, those who don't understand their place don't belong in the Imperial Guard." His hand clenched slightly. "On planet Novice, every other force is nothing more than a pest to the Empire." His voice carried an edge of unwavering conviction. "We've learned this. Everyone out there, every so-called faction, they all use and deceive the Empire for their own gain." Ailey remained silent, simply watching him, his usual carefree demeanor absent. Then, after a long pause, he spoke. His voice was softer, tinged with something Luka couldn't quite place. "I know. That's what we were taught." As he spoke, his gaze drifted, catching sight of something in the distance. A young girl. She stood just outside a small shelter, holding a bag in one hand. In her other hand, she clutched a delicate white flower, her fingers curling gently around its fragile stem. She extended it toward a woman, her mother, who smiled warmly at her. A brief, fleeting moment of innocence. Then, the scene shifted. The battle begins, the sky darkened. Smoke rose from burning buildings, filling the air with the acrid scent of destruction. Chaos erupted. Amid the carnage, a lone soldier in combat armor strode through the wreckage, a sword in hand. The ground beneath him was littered with bodies, silent, unmoving. Alarms screamed in the background, their sharp wails drowned by the crackling flames, devouring what remained of the outpost. A second armored soldier followed behind him. Without hesitation, the soldier cut down another person, their body collapsing with a dull thud against the rubble. The first soldier, his metal boots stepping over the dead, kept moving forward. His thoughts remained cold, calculating. "Looks like none of the Corins are armed." His fingers tightened around his blade. This training should end without a problem. As Luka moved through the battlefield, his thoughts were cold, mechanical, until his eyes caught something unusual. A young boy, barely old enough to understand war, was huddled against the remains of a broken wall. His small hands covered his tear-streaked face, his fragile body trembling uncontrollably. Beside him, a towering figure clad in armored combat gear stood with a sword in hand. "Luka." The child whimpered between ragged sobs, his voice breaking in fear. Mom. Mom." Luka stiffened. Sweat began to bead on his forehead. He stared at the child, momentarily taken aback. "He's so scared, he can't even move." The boy peeked up through his fingers, his wide, tearful eyes filled with terror. His small frame shuddered violently, completely defenseless. Luka's fingers twitched against the hilt of his sword. A non-combatant, no resistance whatsoever. His mind raced. "If only I had a gun." At that moment, the child locked eyes with him, and instantly let out a piercing cry. Luka's stomach twisted. "Damn it." Then, the commander's voice echoed in his mind, his tone cold, absolute. "There is no need for prisoners. Kill them all." Luka inhaled sharply. His grip tightened around his sword as he pulled it back, taking a proper stance. His mind screamed the words he was forcing himself to believe. "Don't hesitate. They're just insects who drain the Empire's resources." The blade swung downward. A sharp crack split through the air as Luka's sword pierced the wall, just millimeters away from the child's head. A near miss. The boy gasped, frozen in place, his breath shaky as fresh tears rolled down his cheeks. Luka took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Pretend like you're dead." His voice was low, cold. "You might survive that way." The child sniffled, staring up at him in shock. Luka clenched his jaw, his mind at war with itself. He thought of the Emperor, of the consequences. I shouldn't be doing this. If headquarters ever finds out about my actions, I don't know what will happen to me. He turned abruptly and walked away, leaving the child behind. Behind him, the boy continued to cry softly, watching his retreating figure. But Luka's mind wasn't at peace. Should I go back and take care of him? Then, a sudden flash of light illuminated the ground beneath him. The child's head exploded. Luka's breath hitched. He immediately snapped his head upward, his gaze darting toward the top of a nearby building. There, Ailey sat, a sniper rifle in his grip, his posture tense. He slowly shook his head, his golden hair damp with sweat. His expression was unreadable, a mix of sadness and something else. Luka's entire body tensed. A sharp, icy fear gripped him. Ailey, since when was he there? Was he watching everything? Sweat dripped down his face, his hands trembling slightly. Ailey exhaled, his shoulders rising and falling as he sat motionless. Luka clenched his fists. Calm down. Ailey won't report my hesitation. But his paranoia gnawed at him. However, if any of the other trainees saw, I need to keep an eye on Ailey. Then, a sudden burst of light flared behind Ailey. Luka's head snapped toward it. A massive explosion tore through the building. Debris and flames erupted into the air. Luka's chest tightened in sheer panic. His voice tore through the chaos. Ailey. Before he could act, a presence emerged beside him. A figure in a flowing robe appeared at his side, his movements swift and deadly. The air around him crackled with energy, his palm glowing with a searing white light. His white hair flowed around his face as he snarled, "Go to hell, you Accretians." Without hesitation, the robed man unleashed the condensed energy blast toward Luka. Luka's eyes widened in realization. Did he cause that explosion just now? His thoughts raced. If he can create explosions without weapons, then, but before he could react, a new presence materialized behind the white-haired attacker. Luka's body tensed. Someone else had arrived. From above, a warrior descended, twin swords in hand, aiming to strike down the white-haired man. As soon as the Force user sensed the attack, his eyes widened in panic. Instinct took over. He twisted his body backward, gathering energy in his palm before hurling a devastating blast toward his airborne attacker. The moment the warrior saw the energy attack surging toward him, confusion flickered in his gaze. Then, impact. A deafening explosion erupted, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. The force of the blast tore through his armor, shattering it into pieces as his body was flung violently backward. Witnessing this, Luka's breath hitched. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. Force. There was a Force user. The realization sent a chill down his spine. The white-haired man, clad in a flowing robe, stepped forward. His fury was palpable, his entire body trembling with rage. More energy crackled around his hand, swirling with violent intensity. Then, he roared, "This isn't a base. It's a settlement. The people you killed were just doing their best to live." His voice echoed through the ruined battlefield. Behind Luka, the remaining trainees stood still, silent. The weight of the revelation pressed down on them. Luka's thoughts spiraled. Did the captain know about this? If he had told us beforehand, Ailey could have. A loud thud interrupted his thoughts. He turned sharply. Ailey lay on the ground, blood pooling beneath him. His metal arm had been blown apart. His lower abdomen and leg had been blown apart, the metal plating of his body torn to shreds. Ailey coughed, his voice weak. "Luka, I let my guard down. I have no excuses." Luka's jaw clenched. His voice was firm, but a hint of frustration lurked beneath it. I'll take care of him. You go get some rest." His fingers tightened around his sword as his resolve solidified. My hesitation caused this mess. He inhaled deeply, forcing himself to remain calm. I've trained countless times on how to deal with a Force user. I know what to do. I have to fix my mistake, no matter what it takes. Then, his voice rang out across the battlefield. "I'll handle him. Everyone else, disperse and take over the base." At his command, the remaining trainees moved like bullets, vanishing into the battlefield without hesitation. The white-haired Force user's expression twisted in confusion. "Where do you think you're going, you bastards?" he roared, his hands surging with energy once more. His gaze locked onto Luka. Luka narrowed his red eye, analyzing every movement. He's acting as bait, to buy time for his allies to escape. Luka's gaze flickered to the man's hands. In order to use Force attacks, the user must perform a preparatory action. The white-haired man moved swiftly, raising his hands again. Luka's mind raced. His trigger action is hand signs. As long as I can spot distortions in space, Luka's body tensed. I can react to the explosions. He charged forward, dodging the first energy blast that tore through the ground. More attacks followed, but his movements were razor-sharp, precise. The force user's nose bled, sweat pouring down his face. His breathing grew heavier, his body trembling from sheer exhaustion. "Guff-hi," he groaned, struggling to maintain his attacks. Luka, too, was near his limit. Sweat dripped down his face, his body strained under the high-speed maneuvers. But he couldn't afford to slow down. "I'd prefer a battle of attrition, but that's not an option." His fingers tightened around his sword hilt. "If I keep moving at this pace, my body will collapse first. I have to strike, while I still can." Another energy blast surged toward him. Luka's mind screamed, "Faster!" A massive explosion erupted near him, but Luka emerged unscathed, moving at impossible speed. His sword gleamed, raised high. The force user's eyes widened in panic. He hadn't expected Luka to break through. Luka closed in, unharmed, relentless. Panic overtook the white-haired man's face as he desperately prepared another attack. But Luka was already too close. The gap closed. Luka's eyes flashed. "I got him." Luka's sword sliced through the air, its edge glinting under the dim, blood-stained sky. He was mere inches from cutting down the white-haired man, when suddenly, his opponent's hand shot forward. A blast of force energy ignited at point-blank range, surging straight toward Luka's face. His blade bit into the man's chest, tearing through flesh and bone, but the counterattack landed first. The force attack struck Luka's helmet, with devastating impact. Shards of metal shattered in all directions, exposing his uncovered face beneath the broken armor. His vision blurred, his mind reeling. "Death? How?" The thought flickered through his mind as disorientation set in. Before the white-haired man could take his final breath, his bloodied lips trembled, his chest rising and falling in weak, uneven gasps. Tears welled in his eyes, not of pain, but of realization. With a voice heavy with sorrow, he choked out his last words. "You're just a child." Then, his body collapsed. His lifeless form fell back, dragging Luka down with him. Luka's sword remained embedded deep in his chest, its steel drenched in crimson. The ground beneath them was stained red, the man's blood spreading like ink across the dirt. Luka, still panting heavily, his breathing ragged, his fingers trembled as the reality of what had just happened settled in. His gaze drifted downward, where the fragments of his shattered helmet lay scattered around him. He swallowed hard, his thoughts a chaotic storm. "If he had gone through with that attack, I would have died." A mix of frustration and confusion gnawed at him, his mind racing for answers. The Corites are nothing more than fanatics, their beliefs beyond human comprehension. So why did he fail to kill me? Then, a voice echoed in his mind, a memory of the Emperor's command. "Move. Do not let your emotions consume you during battle. This is all for the Empire." Luka's breath hitched as his eyes landed on something in the distance. The young boy's body, the one Aile had killed. His small, fragile form lay motionless, his head completely obliterated by the sniper's shot. A strange weight pressed against Luka's chest. His red eyes flickered, his breath becoming unsteady. His mind repeated the words like a mantra, trying to force himself to believe them. To kill those who threaten the safety of the Emperor and the people of the Empire. That is the sole reason for the Imperial Guard's existence. Then, screams pierced the air. The sounds of pleading voices, desperate cries for mercy. Luka remained frozen, standing amid the bloodbath, his feet rooted to the ground. "Help me! Please, let me live!" The cries were weak, broken. Luka's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't move. He couldn't bring himself to look. The voices echoed in his skull, louder, more desperate. But his thoughts silenced them with a single, unshakable truth. Nothing else.